You got a few minutes? It's time for those of us who are concerned about our nation's future to focus on what's at stake in this year's elections. This is a time of great challenge for our country. We know that somewhere in the world our worst enemies either have or are trying to get their hands on the most dangerous weapons known to man. Small rogue nations are developing nuclear weapons and threatening our allies. Large nations are engaged in massive military buildups. At home, we're girding for the possible onset of a recession. Now, if this wasn't America, I might be worried. But very soon, we'll go to the polls and set a path that will determine how we respond to these challenges. It'll be a decision that we'll make not only for ourselves, but very possibly for generations to come. The path we choose will depend upon our vision of America's role in the world, and most importantly, our vision of our own people. Now, Senator Obama and his campaign see an historic opportunity, a political opportunity. They know that in times of fear and uncertainty, the promise of a safe haven is well received. But there is no sanctuary in what they offer. Their haven is the same tired old refuge of liberalism, the federal government. And the candidate, the least experienced, most liberal in 2 generations, represents a last gasp at imposing the failed 1960s radical leftist agenda that could never succeed in normal times. Now, let me make it as plain as I know how. If Senator Obama is elected president with a Democratic majority in the House and Senate, this country will make a dramatic shift to the left such as we have never seen before. Senator Obama and the Democratic Congress will be unrestrained and unrepentant in making our country, as never before, more divided, more dependent upon a dramatically larger and intrusive federal government. They've already promised $900 billion in new spending, and we'll see additional stimulus packages and so-called investment spending to fulfill their pent-up wish lists. Entitlements, which are already destined to bankrupt our country unless reformed, will be expanded in the guise of health care reform. We will see across-the-board tax increases on income, investments, dividends, and upon the occurrence of death. Why? Because the voracious appetite of the federal government will demand it. Obama's so-called tax cuts for people who don't pay income taxes, of course, aren't really tax cuts at all. Just additional spending in the form of government checks paid for by us, the American taxpayers. Are we really expected to believe that the spending needs of the most liberal government in American history and control of all 3 branches will be satisfied by only raising revenue on the top 5% of American taxpayers? I think we've heard this tune before, like when Bill Clinton campaigned on a middle-class tax cut and when elected imposed a middle-class tax increase. All this is important because how we respond to our economic challenge is more important than the crisis itself. For the last 25 years, the United States, and indeed the world, has enjoyed unprecedented prosperity. Now, you wouldn't know it from listening to Obama, but worldwide, over 1 billion people have been able to lift themselves out of poverty. Now, this is due to America's influence, from our defense of freedom in World War II to the Cold War, to the ascendancy of our free market capitalism, the adoption of open trade policies, and globalization. Yet, some say that our current financial difficulties are evidence that we should turn our back on our founding free market principles, that it's time for big changes. But in a world that's increasingly interconnected by jobs, trade, and global finance, how the future of our economy is viewed by the rest of the world is extremely important to America's economic well-being. The worst thing in the world we could do is appear to be unfriendly to investment and trade with an economy constrained and made uncompetitive by layer upon layer of new regulations and bogged down in the divisiveness of class warfare. Yet, if you're to take them at their word, this is precisely the direction that an Obama administration and a Democratic Congress would take us, turning a short-term recession into a long-term economic decline for the United States. And while our regulatory regime needs to be examined and improved, we should be clear. Capitalism is not the cause of our nation's economic challenges. The subprime mortgage crisis was not rooted in the lack of regulation, but in bad policies promoted by Democratic leaders in Congress that forced lenders to give mortgages to people who couldn't afford the houses they were buying. These are the same politicians who protected the excesses and fraudulent conduct of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and the same ones who now want to control the spending of hundreds of billions of dollars to solve the problem they helped create, and incidentally, who tried to slip $200 billion into the first bailout bill for their political cronies in ACORN, the organization that's now systematically perpetrating voter registration fraud around the country. Now, this record, Obama and his Democrats say, entitles them to total control of all the levers of power in Washington. Under an Obama, Reid, Pelosi scenario, nothing will restrain them from making the secret ballot and union elections become a thing of the past, or the so-called fairness doctrine likely being passed, restricting free speech on talk radio, possibly even the internet. Obama's idea of health care reform is moving more people away from private insurance into a Medicare-type government-run program. His education plan looked no further than the federal bureaucracy that seems to work for the NEA, but not the American people. And his plan to defend the sanctity of life, well, there would be none. Now, if Obama and Congress somehow fail legislatively, they'll just turn to the courts, because they'll be able to nominate and confirm whomever they want to the federal judiciary. In all likelihood, we would lose the Supreme Court to left-wing social, economic, and even military policymaking for a generation. Obama and the Democrats believe that Americans in a time of crisis will be willing to sacrifice their freedoms and abandon their founding principles and common sense and ease into the mediocrity of the warm embrace of the Washington Papa Bear, who will take care of all of our problems for us. These are not the ideals of the America that drew brave men and women from all over the world to our shores. In most cases, they were fleeing nations with the heavy hand of government, intolerance, and class warfare. They risked everything to experience our founding fathers' notion of a limited government with powers that were delineated, checked and balanced, and a land where they could live and prosper in a free, dynamic, and upwardly mobile society, the kind that existed nowhere else in the world. But Obama and his liberal friends, they don't see things that way. The liberal agenda is based upon the belief that there are elites among us who know more and know better than the rest of us, and that with the application of their intellect and power and our money, they can impose regulations, establish programs, bureaus, agencies that will solve all the problems of the masses. Senator Obama and his supporters essentially see society not as dynamic and changing or full of opportunity. They see one that's divided by economic classes into which every one of us is permanently assigned. In their worldview, those in a lesser economic class are therefore presumed to be resentful and envious. So it's the government's job to level things out, or as Senator Obama would say, spread the wealth around. It's about dividing the pie among static classes, not trying to make the pie bigger for everyone or creating opportunity in an upwardly mobile society. Now, this is the reason why they don't understand Joe the plumber. Because he doesn't have a higher income today, they assume that he never will, and that he believes that he never will. They expect him to resent anyone who's doing better than he is instead of planning to do better himself. They don't understand the Joes of the world. Never have, never will.